Welcome, everybody. It is the latest episode of Mock It Like It's Hot. As you can see, I am not Ryan Weisse. He's decided to take a vacation and go sip on tequila in Mexico and rub it in our faces while he says, "Hey, Josh, can you fill in and host for me on Mondays?" Yeah, okay, cool, sure, I got it. Awesome. I'm Josh Hudson filling in for Ryan Weisse. That is Austin Amandolia. And as you can see, it's just the two of us today. Unfortunately, we had a little mix up with some scheduling, but that's okay because Austin, myself, we're here and we have a mock draft room full of people that are itching to get started. And today we are doing a Dynasty startup draft. But here's the flip. It's only a 1 QB draft, not a super flex draft. Holy shit, people's minds are going to be blown. Austin, how you doing this morning, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing great. Yeah, we were talking before the show. I actually picked my draft slot with Superflex in mind and then realized, oh wait, we're only doing one quarterback, but it's still a good draft slot. So we're going to see how this goes, but happy to be here, ready to get going. Love doing some Dynasty startups.
Awesome. Love it. So since I'll be running this conversation, you're going to be the one drafting. So that's going to be fun. Let's pull up the draft board here. Hopefully you've been in the sleeper chat, letting everybody know that this coincides with the start of the show. And that's where we're struggling on getting things started right at 11 a.m. Eastern. But Austin, since you have the controls on the draft, ready to kick this thing off?
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and get started. Am I sure I want to start the draft? Yes, I'm sure. We're going to get Zach on the board.
All right. Zach's sitting here at the 101. Let's start. Let's kind of get the questions rolling here while everybody kind of gets into the draft and gets going and starts the thing and yada, yada, yada. 1 QB versus Superflex. You mentioned taking the 112 because this was more Superflex in your head. Forgot that it's 1 QB. What are the biggest differences in your mind? Obviously, we know the quarterbacks go way early in Superflex versus one quarterback. So talk to us a little bit about draft strategy here.
Yeah, I mean, with Superflex, like right now, we would have all quarterbacks going off the board, and you would see probably the first, 6 to 9 picks would be mostly quarterbacks, which means if you're not in the front half of the first round, you're going to already be down a tier for your number one quarterback. With it being just a single quarterback league, I'm really curious where we're going to see the first quarterback fall, because we're going to learn a lot about people's perception on positional advantage through this startup. And so for me, being on the end is kind of where you've got to reach more for players that you really want on your roster as it is already. It's going to get more interesting with only having one quarterback, because if I was on the end in a Superflex league, I might be more willing to reach a little bit further on quarterbacks, just because like people will take 2 quarterbacks in the first 2 rounds. And if you don't get your guy in that first turn, you might be SOL for the rest of the draft. But here it gets a little bit more interesting. You can get some more balance between your players. So, wow. Travis Kelce already going off the board at the 107. But yeah,
this is Joel we're talking about. We know this is what he does.
I know. It's great. But those are some of the things that come to my mind when I'm thinking about the Superflex versus single quarterback league. Yeah.
So, and I know, and speaking of Joel, we had him on 2 weeks ago when we did our Dynasty Superflex draft, and he'd mentioned that even in single quarterback, you still have value with taking quarterbacks early, because as we saw last year, there was a pretty clear tier gap between the top 2-3 guys, Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and the rest of the field. So if you have one of those guys in a single quarterback league, you already have that positional advantage going forward.
Yeah, particularly if you're in a 6-point passing touchdown league, like that's where really having a guy like Patrick Mahomes can really give you a major advantage in single quarterback leagues. Yeah, in redraft, we tend to preach like wait on quarterbacks. You can get a solid quarterback in the end rounds. But when it comes to Dynasty, I think I'm more willing to take a quarterback early, in particular because they have so much longevity in them compared to some of the other positions. Like if you get Patrick Mahomes, you don't have to worry about a quarterback for what, 10 years? Like
Feels like it.
barring something dramatic happening, he's going to be solid for the next decade. Whereas if you're taking player like particularly running backs, like they they're in that like 5-year range. And so it's a little bit, you get less of a timeline with them. Receivers, you get a longer timeline. So I think that's one of the things that would push me to kind of go quarterback a little bit earlier than I would compared to redraft, is just the amount of time that you will get to start them.
And speaking of quarterbacks, Mr. Joe Pepe taking Patrick Mahomes here at the 110. You follow that up at the 112 with Josh Allen. So I think that really kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about. That positional longevity, it sticks out, it stands out. Now, one thing I do want to point out here before I get into some other topics here. 5 wide receivers off the board in the first 6 picks. Not another one until the 203. And we've had now 7 running backs come off the board. So, and I think this is really interesting because we've seen in a lot of these other mocks that we're doing, wide receivers have been the more dominant position, especially early on. Where's this running back love coming from, especially with the shorter lifespan amongst the positions?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit interesting. I probably, if I weren't talking in the middle of having taken my second pick, probably would have went with a receiver. But, multitasking, you're just kind of flowing with things. I mean, I do find the way this is falling interesting. But if you look at the running backs, apart from Jonathan Taylor, like the ones that are going are ones that are receiving backs. And since we're doing full PPR, I think there is a lot of value in having a solid 3-down back that's going to get a lot of catches. But I think this might end up being something that we look back on later in the draft, depending on where everything falls, that we might be seeing running backs going off the board a little bit too early, given the amount of receivers left. But also we always talk about like receivers are really deep position. And it kind of depends on like, what is your strategy going into a startup draft? Are you trying to win now? Or are you trying to have a balanced team that's going to allow you to compete for several years? And so to me, like if your goal is to win now, you might take some running backs early to lock down that position. Whereas if you're more interested in building over the next 3 to 5 years, you might say, you know what, I'm going to start receiver heavy and then get some younger running backs later on in the draft that might develop over the next few years. And it just kind of depends on like how you approach a dynasty startup.
Yeah, and that actually goes to one of the questions that I wanted to at least bring up a little bit here in this draft. Obviously, this is a mock, so we're not dealing with trades, but you have a lot of people when they're doing these startups. It's like, all right, we're going to hammer this. We're going to win now. Ryan Weisse, that is his philosophy through and through. He doesn't play for 3-4 years down the line. He plays for right now. Then you have some people that like to employ the coin phrase productive struggle, because nobody likes to actually say they're tanking. So give us some insight here, because obviously the strategy changes completely. You might be more likely to select some of these players that maybe are on the older side versus trading back, maybe just focusing your entire draft on guys like a Breece Hall or a Jamar Chase or a Jalen Waddle, who might be a little younger. So walk us through a little bit of how you would approach a productive struggle draft.
Yeah, I think with that, I tend to target a lot of running backs who are in their like second or third year. So I struggle, even if I'm gonna just do a productive struggle route, I struggle to really get the older running backs, because the thing that I struggle with there is like, okay, your Derrick Henrys of the world. They're going to be great when they're healthy, but they're starting to get on up in age that their injury risk is increasing. So I will kind of shy away from the oldest running backs who have the longest staple. Like I'll shy away from Dalvin Cook, from Derrick Henry, and I'll look for some of those like mid-aged running backs, your Christian McCaffreys, your Saquon Barkleys. And then, I mean, with receiver, you can kind of hold off because there are so many, like the position is so deep. You can get a lot of different guys, and there are some staples that because of their age will fall pretty far. Like Devontae Adams was the person I was going to name, and Joel takes him right on cue in the middle of the third round. Like Devontae Adams could be a top 5 receiver this year, regardless of whatever the quarterback situation is in Las Vegas. And he just fell to like wide receiver 15 in this draft. So I'm more willing to kind of be older at receiver, try and get mid-age at running back. But if I'm going to take that productive struggle route, I'm taking Joel's pathway and I'm getting a top tier tight end early, because I think that is one of the most certain ways to ensure success at the gate. So taking Travis Kelce in the first round is a really good move for that type of build, because you're going to be outscoring everybody at tight end consistently, and that alone can help launch a mid-tier team into a playoff run.
See, I tend to do a little differently with the productive struggle, simply because what I prefer to do, I'm going to load up at wide receiver. I'm going to get a lot of the young guys. I'll start with, the Waddles, the Higgins, a Devonta Smith, somebody along those lines that, maybe is starting as a 2, but has that opportunity to make that jump into the team's wide receiver 1 range. And I'll focus on some of those older running backs simply because I have the capability to now deal those guys prior to the start of the season or in the middle of the season for higher draft picks. And if I load up on the younger wide receivers and, I can find that elite tier tight end, I now have the draft capital to where I can focus the rookie draft maybe on the younger running backs coming in to then compete earlier, or continue to load up at wide receivers and then trade some of those draft picks, the younger wide receivers, to get that elite running back to then help me get over the top a little bit quicker. That's kind of the way that I do it, because I feel like it's easier to trade for running backs than it is for that elite wide receiver. So if I focus the draft on the wide receiver position and get the older running backs, which ultimately serve as stopgaps anyway, I feel like it makes more sense. And, to your point, you mentioned like, the older wide receivers that kind of make, that are going to fall. Devonta Adams going here probably in that wide receiver 15 range. The same can be true for running backs. I mean, I'll give Nick Scripp a shout out at P2W Fantasy. He is doing these like positional only drafts with his Patreons, and he just did a running back only draft. Derrick Henry went at the 206, and they're drafting in 12 with 12 picks.
Wow,
that's like RB 17, 18 off the board. If I can do a productive struggle route and get a Derrick Henry that late, I can flip him before the start of the season or potentially mid-season for an absolute haul to a contender. And I would much rather do that than hold off on, older wide receivers, because I don't feel like they have that same immediacy when it comes to acquisitions, in my opinion, if that makes sense. Yeah,
and I think like to further your point, like one of the things about this is that it ends up being all about timing. Mm-hmm. Like if you're gonna take Derrick Henry with the understanding that you're eventually going to try and trade him away for capital or to get younger, you've got to time that trade really well to get a good return on that pick, because otherwise you're foregoing the opportunity of other players and you're not really getting the same value return. So like you have to be able to be paying attention to other people in your league to know who is competing, who needs a running back, whether or not you're going to be competing that year. And then you have to kind of coincide that with when does Derrick Henry have a really good performance that makes people excited about him and ready to make a big trade for him to push themselves over the edge. So I think that's one of the things. It's like, if you're going to take that route, you've got to be ready to be more active throughout the rest of the offseason and into the regular season to figure out when are you going to make that move to set yourself up for a positive move going forward.
So yeah, 100%. And I think that kind of plays into the idea of, the youth versus the age aspect. I mean, as I'll continue to use Devontae Adams here as an example. I mean, you've got guys like Diggs, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, they're Tyreek Hill. They're going essentially a full round ahead of Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams outscored all those guys except Tyreek Hill last year. Why is he falling so much further? And you have, Jalen Waddle, you have Devonta Smith, you have, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who hasn't even played a down of NFL football, going before the all elite talent of Devontae Adams. At what point do we sit here and say, stop overthinking age and take the proven production?
Yeah. And I mean, again, we keep talking about Joel's team, but that's clearly the route that he has taken with his draft so far. Like he took Travis Kelce, he took Jalen Hurts, and then he's had a run of vets that a lot of people will avoid because of age, between Devontae Adams, Derrick Henry, and Aaron Jones. And, I think one pitfall the dynasty community can fall into very easily is just valuing age above all else, like you're saying. And, there's a running joke that people are consistently trying to win 3 to 5 years out. And well, that's fine. But the point of dynasty is to win now as well. And so you have to decide, when are you going to say, yeah, I'm going to get older because I want to win now, versus when am I going to be building for the future? I think like the way that NFL franchises often think about this is like, what is my 3 to 5 year plan? And if you're going to mimic that in dynasty, well, then your plan needs to be to win in 3 to 5 years, not to continue building every 3 to 5 years and saying, oh, but I got this new prospect and he's going to put me over the top. No, you've got to actually see the full plan through to get to that victory within 3 to 5 years.
So, and, speaking of, you have a lot of these teams that are doubling up on wide receivers early in their team respector drafts, not the fantasy people here that are drafting. I'm talking about like the Bengals with your Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, the Lions here with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then trading up to draft Jamison Williams. The Eagles go out and trade for A.J. Brown after drafting Devonta Smith early the year prior. I'll even throw the Falcons into this mix, spending a first round pick on Kyle Pitts, goes out, catches 1,000 yards, turning around, spending a first round pick on Drake London. At what point are we weighing in, San Francisco 49ers, another prime example, having Deebo Samuel, then turning around, drafting Brandon Ayuk. Where are we fitting these teams and players really in your drafting strategy here? Like, are we saying, you know what, I want to get out, I want to acquire that top guy because I know that that's where the production is? Or does it make more sense to turn your attention to another position, a la running back, maybe grab that elite tight end, and then take the, round, 2 round, maybe 3 round discount on the 1B option or the 2 option?
Yeah, I think for me, when I am doing a startup, I'm looking at talent beyond all else. I will sometimes assess situation and use that to, basically be a tiebreaker for certain players. But I'm not necessarily looking at a team and deciding like, oh, I don't want to take this guy now because there's another really good receiver in that receiving room or not. Like I will just be like, this is an incredible receiver. I like the talent being utilized in that offense. Let's take him there. So I don't have like a formula for those teams where they have 2 top receiving options. I do think it kind of naturally happens that I will take the number 1 option earlier, about 3 rounds earlier than the 1B option in those teams. But that's not something I'm necessarily going into a draft thinking about. It's kind of ends up falling and ending up that way by default. But we've seen that teams can very frequently sustain 2 top receiving options that are elite from a fantasy perspective. I mean, we saw it last year. There were multiple teams that had 2 receivers finish within the top 12 in fantasy. Philadelphia Eagles, one of them with A.J. Brown and Devonta Adams. And so, sorry, Devonta Smith. Thank you.
So disrespect my birds now, man.
I mean, I think saying Devonta Smith is like Devonta Adams is a compliment, but whatever. And so I'm not really afraid of those teams that have a 1A and a 1B receiving option. Honestly, like I still tend to shy away from having both on the same roster, but if you have the right team, like I think it's fine to just say, yeah, 1A and 1B, they're going to both be great and they can be taken pretty close to each other. I feel like AJ Brown and Devonta Smith, like you could see they're only 2 rounds apart from each other. I feel like that's pretty close, pretty solid given some of the other options that went in between, but I could see Devonta Smith even going closer to AJ Brown just because he just showed us he can be a top 10 fantasy receiver. And I'm always going to take that talent and that situation over trying to split hairs between like, is the 1A or the 1B going to be better in the long run?
So I want to shift gears for a second as we get here into the middle of the 7th round. We've brought up Travis Kelce and obviously his stranglehold on the position and how much superior he is than everyone else. Obviously, this is Dynasty, so you're playing a long game, and ultimately what you're trying to do is find the next Travis Kelce, if there is a next Travis Kelce, somebody that's going to dominate the position from here on out. Something that I noticed 2 weeks ago when we did the Superflex Dynasty startup, there was a bit of a gap between Kelce and then like the Kyle Pitts, the Mark Andrews here. Some of these people drafting in this draft were with us the last time. Some of them are not, which I like simply because you have different strategies that will be deployed. You have basically in 5 straight rounds a tight end win. So what I'm curious, your thoughts here, Austin, is how early is too early in a Dynasty startup for a tight end that's not named Travis Kelce? Because really at that point, it's a crapshoot, right? From 2 to 12, there really isn't much difference in points per game. Yet you're going through and you're spending a 2nd round pick on Kyle Pitts when I could get Dallas Goedert in the 5th round.
Yeah, I really struggle with tight ends this year in that 2 to 5 round range because of the point that you're saying. There's such a drop off after Travis Kelce that I'm really nervous to take a tight end not named Travis Kelce before the 5th round. I think if you're going to do it right now, Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson are the ones to go after. And I'm fine with taking that risk on them. But I think at this point, like with Kyle Pitts, it's all projection. It's projecting that he can get back to that year 1 production. And we think he can, given his talent, like definitely given his talent, but come
on, man, Desmond Ridder, GOAT status. Let's go, baby.
I mean, I do love Desmond Ridder. I'm very excited about it. Don't get me wrong. But what I'm more worried about is the whole Arthur Smith piece of the equation and how much is he going to be looking to run the ball versus get to a more balanced offense. That's one of my big outstanding questions. And depending on how that goes is going to really depend on where I think Kyle Pitts should be going in drafts. Beyond that, TJ Hawkinson, I think should be the tight end 2 right now because he has just shown that he can do it. And I think being the 2nd or 3rd option behind a Justin Jefferson is an incredible opportunity for him. And he showed last year he can be an elite tight end option for fantasy players. So, and he's only 25 years old. So TJ Hawkinson, to me, I think I'm comfortable with him in the 2nd or 3rd round. After that, I'm not taking anybody until the 5th round. And if I don't get one of these like Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Dallas Goedert types, I might be punting a very long time before I get my first tight end.
So I want to highlight a couple teams here as we get into the 8th round. The boys, Mr. Kevin Coleman, who you will hear more from on Wednesday's edition of No Punt Intended as we preview the wide receiver class with him and our good buddy Joe Pepe. Through 7 rounds, they took a cue from Joel Worth's book and went the whole 0 RB route, which I'm very disappointed that Joel has now drafted 3 running backs in round 8 and is completely throwing away his strategy here. Let's just talk about 0 RB here. What's kind of your thought process here? And, I saying that knowing that you now have selected 3 running backs here in your draft in this mock. Pepe goes through and selects Montgomery here in the 8th round. We're still waiting on Kevin, who has not 1 but 2 tight ends already, but going very heavy on the pass catchers. What really just give us your thoughts on 0 RB as a whole and why you think it can work and is a viable draft strategy.
I think as a whole, can work if you are active, like in redraft. I think it can work if you're active on the waivers and things cut the right way and you get the right backups. For best ball, it's very situation dependent, and we'll talk about that in future episodes when we do some best ball mock drafts. For Dynasty, it is my least favorite place to do a 0 RB strategy. But given the way that the running backs are falling, it can really work out, particularly if you're willing to go a little bit older at running back and say, we're going to try and compete now. And we'll worry about fixing our running back situation later. I mean, as an example, there are some players still on the board are Alvin Kamara, James Conner. I mean, Brian Robinson is even still up. And then there's some other good rookies that, they could get in the right situation and pop off, such as Tank Bigsby, Kendre Miller. I mean, we still got Khalil Herbert on the board. So there's still plenty of good running back options available if you're going to take a 0 RB strategy within this startup. And I think in particular, if you're able to kind of make that move where you're getting these veteran running backs at a discount, it can help you be competitive out the gate. Kevin continuing to go with a 0 RB route. I'd love
fuck them running backs. I love it, Kevin.
But I think if you're going to go this route, you're in many ways you're accepting that you're either going to be taking dart throws at rookie running backs, or you're going to be getting older at running back and having to rebuild within a few years. So it's one of those things. It's a little bit of a risky strategy. I feel like it's a win now strategy, but if you do it and you win your dynasty league, like great, you have several years that you can work to remake your roster and get back to another win. Like if you win the first year, particularly if you're in a buy-in league, like just thinking through the finances of that, like that gives you a lot of time to rebuild and try and win again and still break even with your league dues.
And I'll bring up Joe's comment here. His strategy: load up on wide receivers and then use future draft picks on running backs. And this kind of goes to the point that I was mentioning with the, with like a startup versus productive struggle strategy. With that productive struggle, if you focus on the wide receiver position, you can pick your poison on some of these older running backs that have much shorter lifespans, flip them for future picks, or just ride them and, hope that maybe you get into a position where you can win, which is very possible if those wide receivers take off. Joe kind of ushering in that exact same strategy here, and Joel chiming in on the 0 RB strategy. Most important part is knowing when to pivot, such as when only 4 go in the first. And I think that's a pretty viable strategy as well. So, all right, where to look here? Let's look at B Jensen 86. I know part of this was a auto draft, but 5 straight running backs, followed by Keenan Allen, Jahan Dotson, and Tyler Lockett. 2 of those guys could be cut candidates heading into the 2024 draft or 2024 season, excuse me. Viable strategy? Victim of auto draft? No quarterbacks, no tight ends. What are we thinking here, Austin?
Well, so I think for this one, I think at least the first 3 picks were auto draft. So we won't, go either way on that. I mean, I wouldn't do 3 running backs to start off in a startup just particularly because we're PPR and receivers are going to be worth so much more in that situation. The next 2 running backs is where I really feel like we have hit like past the danger zone and like should have turned around a long time ago. Just because you can't really, I mean, in this league, you can't even start off 5 running backs the way that I set it up. We have 2 flex positions. So one of these running backs is going to be on your bench. Now, if your idea is I'm going to load up on elite running backs that I can then use as capital later on to acquire draft picks, to acquire different players, I think that is a fine strategy that you can take. And it's a way that you can pivot this team once it's, had some of those auto picks that kind of mess up any potential strategy you came in with. But overall, the team building strategy is not something that I would do in a dynasty startup. I think having Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler as my first 2 picks, like if I were to have done that, after that, I would have immediately started going to tight end, receiver, and quarterback and start building out those other positions because you have a good chance of having 2 of the top 3 running backs in 2023, and that advantage can make you so competitive that if you can hit the right players in the other positions, it'll give you a good chance at competing out the gate.
And there he goes with his first tight end, Darren Waller. I like that. Can handle that. Okay. So, and kind of staying on the theme here with running backs, I want to kind of talk, we'll call them volatile players. Okay. Obviously, age may play into it. Situation could play into it. We've done a couple startups now on Mock It Like It's Hot here. I'm sure you've done your own mock drafts outside of the shows. Looking at this draft board, looking at other drafts that you've been a part of, what are some players based on their ADP that really scare you, that are just like, you know what, this person's going way too high, not really feeling it. I don't really understand where the love is coming from. If the algorithm on Sleeper is just batshit bonkers right now, like what's going through your head with some of these players?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. What's one thing that's I would just caveat this all with is like ADP. I feel like sometimes goes out the window when it's super fuck or with dynasty startups because sometimes people are just like, these are my players, I gotta get them, and so they will just go for them no matter what. I think the players that kind of concern me the most when it on ADP right now, I mean, Jonathan Taylor is one that I have a lot of questions about, like seeing him go as high as he is still. I'm given some of the youth that is coming into the running back position, I feel like he should be going down a little bit. I mean, just looking at the way that this draft is falling, I think it is interesting to me, like to see how far down Devontae Smith and Devontae Adams are going. Like those 2, I feel like you're getting a really big value right now. For people that I think are still too high, I mean, George Kittle, I think is a great example of what you were just describing with the volatile player that is keeping a high ADP. Like he is very consistently going as the tight end 5, and he really only showed up for like a 4-game stretch last season, and then like
Sounds like
popped up.
Evan Ingram.
Exactly, Evan Ingram, and him going in the 8th round, 9th round here, I think is a little bit better. But I've seen Evan Ingram going way earlier than I'm comfortable with. I've seen him going before Pat Fryermuth at times. So like some of those players where it's like, okay, they had a good end to the season, and that's gotten some people in on them. Those are the ones that make me nervous. I also feel like I've seen Cam Akers going very early, and he had a good end to the season last year. I feel like that's a bit of a trap. Like I don't really know what's going on in that LA Rams running back room. So those are a few that come to my mind initially. Trying to think if there's any others.
I think I'll bring this one up. I think Tony Pollard is a very interesting case. I've
Yes.
seen I think this one he goes, 503, it looks like, overall. So you're talking still not even a top 12 running back after the year that he had coming back on the franchise tag. No Ezekiel Elliott. He's primed to be the RB1. Now, if you're like me and other people as part of Club Fantasy and you feel like Bijan Robinson is headed to Dallas because that's just the Jerry Jones kind of pick, then yeah, maybe his draft position makes a little bit more sense. But, you kind of have to work with the information that you have, right? Like, as of right now, Tony Pollard is a locked in RB1 on a team that's not afraid to run the football. Why do you think that he's not getting the kind of love that he was being shown in 2022 when everybody and their mother was singing his praises?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I do feel like whether it's Bijan Robinson or not, I feel like Dallas is a prime candidate for drafting a running back this year. And so I agree that what that means for Tony Pollard could just mean that he continues the same role he had. I mean, the largest critique of Tony Pollard is that while he has been more athletic than Ezekiel Elliott for probably a couple of years now, he has not consistently demonstrated that he can take a 3-down role and take 20 to 30 touches a game like some of the top 5 running backs in the league. I think another one on ADP that really catches my eye, Justin Fields, is one that really makes me nervous where he's going at an ADP. He's going at about somewhere between the 5th and the 8th quarterback overall. And I worry about it from the perspective that he had a good stretch of games last season where he was rushing a lot and having these 100 rushing yard games. That was really, I mean, it was record setting. He was playing incredibly, but he didn't have the passing to go along with it. And part of that's because of just the nature of the offense. And also he got banged up doing that role so much. And so he's one of these players that I feel nervous about because I'm not exactly sure how they're going to continue to use him going into this season, if he's going to keep that rushing upside that he had last year, or if he's going to kind of pull back some and we're going to see them trying to turn him more back into a pocket passer with some of the upgrades that they've tried to make at receiver. And so I'm a little curious what that's going to do to his fantasy performance and his fantasy upside, particularly if you are playing in kind of a standard league where passing touchdowns are only 4 points. I think taking him in the 5th round, I'm okay with, but I've seen him go ahead of Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence at times. And that feels a little bit much for me, a little bit beyond my comfort zone, just because I'm not exactly sure how his 2022 season is going to translate to 2023.
So I'll let the Bears fan here chime in. Mr. Gemmo, the icon. Fields will be fine. Let's hope so. But staying on the topic of the Bears, I do want to bring this up simply because you spent the 401 on Justin Fields' latest weapon, DJ Moore. So Fields now, from the start of 2022, when he had basically Darnell Mooney and a bunch of Walmart grocery baggers, to now getting Chase Claypool in the middle of the season for what essentially turned out to be the 32nd overall pick in the 2023 draft, to then trading down in the first round, picking up a slew of draft picks, and now DJ Moore. So now his wide receiver room looks demonstrably better when you have DJ Moore as your wide receiver 1, you have Darnell Mooney, you have Chase Claypool, you bring in Deonta Foreman, who had 900 plus rushing yards in essentially 9 games last year. I mean, how much growth do we truly expect Justin Fields to have to then justify that ADP? Because it almost feels like that's where that ADP swing is coming from. It's the projection, right?
Yes. Yes, it is definitely, it is coming from the projection. And I think that is one of the things. This comes back to the strategy that we were talking about earlier with if you're going to do kind of a productive struggle, or if you're going to kind of go for it out the gate, is there's a lot of you have to decide if you're going to go the route of trying to project players or if you're going to go the route of taking like known commodities. And I think that is where Justin Fields is a great conversation for this, because there's still a lot of projection for Justin Fields and where his future is going to be. I think that the talent is there, the potential is there, but if that is going to continue to translate into consistent performances in his third and fourth seasons, that's an open question to me, given all that he has had to go through over the past 2 years. The Bears have kind of they haven't done what they've needed to really support him out the gate. So I mean, I think it is going to be great to have better receiving options, because I think that one of the issues Justin Fields faced last year was the lack of just weapons to be able to pass the ball to. But I think, to me, like, it's ultimately going to come down to what can the Bears do on the offensive line, because if they can't protect Justin Fields, I don't know that it's going to matter what kind of receiving options he has. The thing that Justin Fields needs to be able to do is to figure out how to drop back and find his target on time. Like, that was his struggle last year. And some of that was because he was consistently coming under threat and having to dish out of the pocket and then find an open receiver. If that doesn't change, it's not going to help him develop as a passer, which is ultimately what I think Justin Fields needs to be solidified as a perennial fantasy star.
So I'll bring up a couple things here from the chat while we're on the subject of Fields. Our friend Gator J, same thing was said about Hurts last year, and it's 100% true. You know, Howie Roseman, the GM, he fixed that. He went out and he got someone like AJ Brown, who has a great relationship with Jalen Hurts. We saw the type of progress and start of the career that Devonta Smith had. Jalen Hurts then put in the work in the offseason, and you saw the turn in his production. And our friends over at the Debbie Royale, presumably this is Kevin. Remember, don't chase points and narratives from 2022. Always have to project forward in fantasy. And again, 100% correct, right? I think all of these points are great. It boils down to right now the pieces are in place for Justin Fields, and then it becomes what happens here. It's between the mentals, right? It's how much work are you going to put in with quarterback coaches, with outside of the organization quarterback coaches, mentors that you talk with, the mechanics that you work on. All of those things will come into play. We saw the same thing with Josh Allen when he came into the league. Accuracy was absolute dog shit. Brian Dable got a hold of him. Ken Dorsey worked with him. You saw a major change in how he performed on the field and how he is now positioned in the hierarchy of the quarterbacks, not just within the NFL, but also in fantasy. Jalen Hurts took that big step. Now it's Justin Fields' turn. So it's going to be really interesting, because I feel like, and I don't think I'm alone in this, 2023 is going to be that pivotal year for Justin Fields. And by trading out of the number one pick, the Chicago Bears have put themselves in a situation that they are betting on Justin Fields. They're making the moves to say, you know what? You're our guy. We got to help you get better. We're going to take that step, but this is a two-way street. So now what are you going to do?
Yeah, and I think one key thing to point out in this, with particularly the Jalen Hurts example, is they had Jason Gelfs. They had a
stout offensive
line. And so, yes, it is very possible that Justin Fields takes the Jalen Hurts path in 2023. However, given the current free agency moves, if we're going off of what the team build of Chicago is today, there are still holes in that offense that give me pause about putting a premium pick on Justin Fields. Now, if the Chicago Bears do what Philadelphia did last year and continue to build more of a foundation for Justin Fields, I think he does have the potential to go on the Jalen Hurts pathway. The counterpoint, though, to Jalen Hurts, I think, is Mac Jones, because he was the best quarterback out of the 2021 NFL draft coming out in his first year. And then last year, the Patriots offensive staff was just completely bonkers, and they barely had an offensive coordinator. and their system just didn't make any sense. And all of a sudden, Mac Jones was getting chance to be replaced with Bailey Zappi. Like that, like as much as it can go in the Jalen Hurts direction, it can go in the complete opposite direction. And I think like it is fine if your play style is to be willing to take that risk and to make that projection. Like I think it is totally fine and reasonable to take that dart throw on Justin Fields, that he continues to progress the way he has. I think there's a lot of evidence that he will. It's a reasonable assumption to make. And it is also, to me, I can make a case that it doesn't pan out for him and that he turns into he takes the Mac Jones pathway where he has success and then kind of fades back because the offensive doesn't do what it needs to do to continue to support him. I would bet on him panning out. I just still have questions.
Fair enough. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. We're coming up on the last 2 rounds here of this mock draft. We mentioned at the top, you started with the 112. So talk to me a little bit about what strategy you were looking to employ going into this draft. And then we'll get into how things turned and went fluid and you had to pivot.
Yeah. So when I'm doing a startup, I'm almost always trying to have somewhat of a balanced roster that I feel like can compete at the gate, but is also adding young pieces that are going to develop and be staples in the next 3 to 5 years. I've tried going the route where I'm just like, I'm going to win now. And when I've done it, I always hate my roster by like week 5 of the season. So I've decided that I prefer to kind of target some of those mid-aged players and be able to be competitive, be somewhat competitive out of the gate while still giving myself options later on down the road. And so I wanted to get at least one anchor running back from the beginning. And I decided to see what I would feel like with Kenneth Walker being that anchor running back by the time I got towards the end of my draft. And right now I'm feeling pretty good about that. You know, I considered going the Najee Harris route because I've been a fan of Najee Harris, but I already did that in an actual Dynasty league recently. So I'm trying to just do something different and see what I think when it's Kenneth Walker. And I feel pretty good about how that's gone. And then the big thing is with me being on the end, I wanted to get a quarterback early to get that positional advantage. So I took Josh Allen. I would have gone with Patrick Mahomes if he had fallen, but Joe Pepe snagged Mahomes rightfully as the QB1 in Dynasty. And then the place where my plan kind of really went awry, I was kind of gauging how long I could wait on tight end because I don't want to be in a situation where I'm needing to pick between Cole Kmet and Dawson Knox as my top tight end. And so I was one thing I was curious going into the draft of what I was going to do at tight end. And I didn't want to take one in the second round because that felt too early for me to be reaching on Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson. And I also just wanted to see like how far they fell. So if I could go back, I would probably just go ahead and take TJ Hawkinson at the second round because it's a long time before I could take my next pick at the 312. But because I missed out on TJ Hawkinson, I knew I didn't want Mark Andrews or George Kittle, and that's why I ended up with Dallas Goedert because I feel like he's kind of in a tier by himself in some ways of like that next tier below the Kyle Pitts, TJ Hawkinson tier. And I feel like he has the upside to kind of really go up above Mark Andrews and George Kittle. And just to me, like Goddard is a more consistent tight end option than those two. I mean, Mark Andrews, he didn't play a lot last season, and when he did was shaky. And then George Kittle, he is a boomer bust player. So I like that Goddard fell where he did, but those are some of the things I was looking at in those opening rounds, really trying to focus on positional advantage and getting that anchor running back early to ground that position for my team.
Yeah, you mentioned getting the anchor running back because your next couple running backs here, they could find themselves either in quite the timeshares after the 2023 drafts or out of a job altogether. And I'm talking about Damian Pierce in Houston and Tyler Algier in Atlanta. There's been a lot of talk that maybe Bijan could be their target, Atlanta's, which, ultimately would put Algier out of a job. We saw Devin Singletary sign a 1-year deal with Houston. Damian Pierce didn't finish the season, but a lot of his production came from heavy volume. And how then is that going to affect his stock when you take away a lot of that volume? So, and again, this plays into how running back rooms are shaped, because there aren't very many workhorse 300 touch running backs anymore. And we kind of need to fill out our running back rooms with guys that are in timeshares. So it makes a lot more sense to spend later picks and load up on guys like that versus forcing picks early to just nab running backs. And I'll come back to Jensen's draft where he ends up with, 5 guys here at the top. None of these guys are really splitting carries. So in a way, maybe we're the ones laughing at the auto draft, or the auto draft is laughing at us, excuse me, because they know more than we do. I don't know. Just find it interesting is kind of what I'm getting at here. But I do want to point out some of your later wide receiver picks here. You get Deebo Samuel, you get DJ Moore here at the top. Josh Downs, a rookie. Kadarius Toney, we know his situation in Kansas City. Jacoby Myers, still have no idea how he's fitting with Las Vegas. Kayshon Boutte, or Butte, however you want to pronounce it, has the most awful job interview of his life at the combine. And then KJ Osborne. Be honest with me, Austin. How much confidence do you really have in this wide receiver room with this draft?
Oh, I have very little confidence in this wide receiver room. This did not go how I wanted it to at all. Here's what I'll say about my wide receiver room. I like Deebo Samuel and I like DJ Moore. And then I feel great about KJ Osborne as my wide receiver 6, 7. Like, that is the steal of this draft to me. The fact that he is going in the 13th, the 12th round. Like, I don't understand why people aren't in on KJ Osborne yet. Like, there was hype around him last year, and then Adam Thielen was like, I'm out. And now people are like, okay, well, KJ Osborne's not a big deal. I'm like, wait a minute.
I think part of it is twofold, right? They swing the trade to get TJ Hawkinson, who basically immediately becomes their number 2 target behind Jefferson. And then seeing how Jefferson kind of disappeared towards the tail end of the season, especially during championship week, which, yeah, that's a tangent for another day. I don't want to vent here on the stream. So a lot of pundits are going into this draft saying, you know what? Minnesota needs a true number 2 wide receiver to take pressure off of Justin Jefferson. And with that feeling, they're kind of tossing KJ Osborne to the side because nobody thinks that he is that guy.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking about projections earlier when I'm at my 6th receiver and I'm just looking for depth, like that's where I'm going to take the projection and say, like, I think he is going to be that guy. We saw he had several games where he popped or late, kind of mid towards the end of the season. And I feel like KJ Osborne has the opportunity to move into that wide receiver 2 role. That's my take. And right now where we're at, like, maybe Minnesota takes a receiver, but where they take a receiver is also going to be a relevant question. Like, if they take a receiver in the 1st round, yeah, KJ Osborne's probably out. If they take a receiver in the 3rd or 4th round, then it becomes an open question, and we could have a competition between KJ Osborne and whoever they end up drafting for that wide receiver 2 spot. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of upside with that pick, and when you're getting towards the later rounds, that's kind of where you're taking those dart throws for upsides. The bigger concerns I have in my wide receiver room elsewhere is like Kadarius Toney. He's going to be great when he's healthy, but that has been a big if over the past couple of years. He has missed a lot of time, and so we'll see how that one pans out. I love Jacoby Myers as a later round pick. He's falling just way too far for me. I think he is a talented player, and he was in a awful offensive situation last year, like we just talked about with Mac Jones. That offensive scheme was rough last year. But now he's going to be in Las Vegas being the number 2 behind Devonta Adams. Like he's
How
going to have so
dare
much
you
more
smear the
opportunity.
good name of Hunter Renfrow on a club fantasy podcast? What the hell's the matter?
I'm not
with you?
smearing his name. He's just where was he last year?
You just said he's gonna not even the wide receiver 2 on his own team now. Come on.
Well, he's not. He wasn't last
Look,
year.
injuries happen.
Mac Hollins was the wide receiver 2 last year.
Yeah, didn't start this season that way. Just saying. Injuries happen. It's okay.
Even when he was healthy.
Doesn't mean you have to forget about people, Austin.
Even though he was healthy. Let's be honest.
He was just fine the year before. Thank you very much. All right. Real quick, let's shift gears as we come up in the last few minutes here. As everybody can see, we paused the draft with the last pick. And the reason that we try to do this is that it allows us to kind of look through some of the players that are still available. Dynasty startup drafts, many of them will go 24, sometimes even 30 rounds because you have taxi squads that you fill out. And then, of course, depth on teams is much deeper. Waiver wires tend to be a lot thinner. I have a couple teams that I personally would like to spotlight as teams that I that have builds that I really liked and that I appreciate in this startup. But Austin, I'll start with you. If there's a team that kind of stands out to you as one that just like everything just sort of fell into place, and by the 15th round, you're like, all right, this is going to be one of those contenders that I got to step my game up to beat.
Yeah, I love how Joel's draft went. Those first 5 to 8 picks, I feel like went really well for him. And he's also done a great job of setting himself up for the future, even while kind of getting some of those older running backs. I mean, his running back room is really interesting to me. Like, first off, obviously, Derrick Henry and Aaron Jones, they're solid staples. I think they're going to continue to be great this year. We might see a little bit of decline from Derrick Henry because he's starting to get a little bit older. But as far as I'm concerned, he's still the primary. He's the Tennessee run is going to still run their offense through Derrick Henry. And then Rashad Penny in Philadelphia. Look, the big issue with Rashad Penny is always going to be health. But with that offensive line, I love the landing spot for Rashad Penny. And if you get 4 games out of him, he's going to win you pretty much
just
every
trade
week.
him after the first one. Oh, he's going to be healthy all year. You're good.
Exactly. That's exactly what you do. And then, I mean, the receiving options worked out really well for Joel. Like getting Deontay Johnson in the 6th round, I think is really great. Like, I think people are expecting very little out of the Pittsburgh Steelers just next year, but I feel like they're going to continue to get better, and Deontay Johnson just continues to be a target hog. I also love the Isaiah Likely pick in the 14th round for Joel because he's got Travis Kelce, so he doesn't have to worry about tight end, and he can just focus on, okay, let me build for the future right now and get Isaiah Likely as someone that hopefully takes over the Mark Andrews role within that Baltimore offense. And I think that's a reasonable dart throw. And then having Jordan Love as the future prospect to replace Jalen Hurts, like I really love how that turned out for him. So I think Joel's team is probably my favorite one overall. Definitely not my team, but Joel really kind of killed this draft.
So I've got 2 that I want to highlight. And I'll start with our buddy Gator, Jay. The first 5 picks, in all honesty, really, I'd even extend it to 6 or 7. Starting wide receiver heavy, you get a stud in A.J. Brown, you get an older stud in Cooper Kupp, and then a younger stud in Chris Olave. I mean, I think it's hard to do that well starting with 3 wide receivers, and he knocked it out of the park. I'm a huge Trevor Lawrence guy. He took a major step forward, getting an actual competent coach and play caller in Doug Peterson last year. We know how good Chris Godwin is. Obviously, the quarterback situation is a little sketchy, but he is the 4th option there for him at wide receiver, and I think that's a great gamble. J.K. Dobbins is primed for a huge bounce back. I know everybody was big on him last year, but when you factor in these knee injuries, and especially the type of knee injury that he had, where it wasn't just the ACL, it was, the LCL and parts of a PCL and every other CL that you can think of. Took him a while to come back, and they're going to ride him this year, especially with the question marks at quarterback. Is Lamar Jackson back? Is he not back? I think you're going to see a lot more J.K. Dobbins, even if he doesn't get the passing volume that we want to see from him. The wide receivers can help carry the weight there. Rachaad White, again, another running back, kind of similar in a Tony Pollard role, where we saw some big games out of him, but was stuck in a timeshare. Now he's kind of that lead guy by default now until we see what happens with the draft and as the offseason goes along. Because if they don't improve that quarterback position, because let's face it, Kyle Trask sucks and Baker ain't it, they're going to lean on the running backs. That's going to be big, not only for Rachaad White's usage, but also his potential as a pass catcher in this offense. So I love that start. And the other one I want to bring out, our good buddy Joe Pepe. Again, we've talked about the quarterback going early. It is a one quarterback league, but again, these guys are 10+ year starters. Patrick Mahomes, he ain't going anywhere anytime soon, unless, God forbid, knock on wood, there's some catastrophic injury. He's it, and he is the Dynasty QB1. 5 straight wide receivers. You get a stud in Tyreek Hill, although Tyreek Hill has already put his expiration date on the NFL. That's fine. Load up on the young guys. Drake London, Jameson Williams, Treylon Burks. A lot of question marks, but definitely situations where these guys can produce. And then you get someone like Marquise Brown, who we've seen produce. And as of right now, yes, is the 1B to DeAndre Hopkins. But you kind of got to believe that Hopkins isn't going to be there with the amount of money that he's making. I don't know. I'm just holding out hope. Regardless, Freiermuth there at the 1 for the tight end position. I think that's a good spot for him in a startup. And then just loading up on the running backs. And I think that's really how you should be building. Grab some of these later guys that can be in these timeshares that, you'll get some good weeks. You can kind of mix and match, situational based with, your A.J. Dillons, your Madisons, your Kenny Gainwells. I think there's a lot to like with both Gators draft and Joe's draft. And to me, these are really different ways that you can approach a startup, but both equally effective.
Yeah. I'm down with that. I think one thing I would add about Joe's is I think he timed the running back run very well, because if he had waited a little bit longer, you get into some really icky territory with running backs. Like if you were trying to do a running back run beyond round 15, I would be feeling very nervous, because you have like Cordell Patterson. He might be playing still next year. You have Michael Carter still on the board, Jerick McKinnon still on the board, Isaiah Spiller. Like these aren't running backs that I'm feeling very confident in right now. James Robinson, maybe a bunch of rookies. So I think Joe, as you point out, Josh, he timed it really well, and he took, I think, really good dart throws at running back of players that they're either in timeshares and have upside if other players get hurt, or they have demonstrated in the past like the ability to be top 10, top 15 running backs.
Love it. All right. And this concludes this week's episode of Mock It Like It's Hot. Appreciate everybody for jumping in the mock draft and helping us actually have this show, because let's be honest, a bunch of auto picks, not really fun to talk about, even though in some instances they make us seem like dumbasses because they actually do their job. What do you know? AI is crazy. Anyway, tomorrow night, Tuesday night, we have the latest episode of Her Story in the Making. Host Britt Flynn sits down with Jen Polvote from IBT Media, Razball, a few other things. Absolute rock star. If you've ever been to the expo, had a chance to meet Jen, she is truly an amazing person, and I can't wait to hear her story. It's going to be a lot of fun. The latest episode of Who's Your Caddy with Kelly Singh and Adam Hallis. Woo! Kelly picked the winner of the Masters. I'm just saying. People, she knows her picks. Her and Adam, they do great work on Who's Your Caddy. The latest episode of No Punt Intended, Wednesday night at 7. It is a pre-record this week. Joe Zolo and myself, we sat down with a couple of fine folks from the Devy Royale and football guys. Kevin Coleman, who's here in this draft. Christian Williams. We preview the rookie wide receiver class. That'll be dropping once again at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then you can join us next week here at the same time, same channel. Mock It Like It's Hot, 11 a.m. Ryan Weisse will be back. You probably won't see me because I like to sleep on Monday mornings after a really long weekend. But you'll see Ryan, you'll see Austin, and then our good buddy, Iowa Mike from 4D Chess and Destination Devi will be joining for a rookie draft. And he'll probably tell Austin when he decides to draft Kayshon Boutte again, stop with the booty picks, man, because they suck. Anyway, for Austin, at Austin_FFL, for myself, at the One Hudsonian, and for Mr. Ryan Weisse, who is not here, at the Fantasy 5, that is 5 spelled out. You can find all of our work at Club Fantasy FFL, the URL clubfantasyffl.com. See you guys next week. Austin, any final parting words?
Nope. See y'all next week. Thanks for joining.
Peace out, y'all.